Welcome to Stillwater Chronicles. Tonight, we settle into a story about a woman who was found in a lake and what she said before she went back in. There is a particular kind of silence that belongs to the Scottish Highlands at dusk. It is not the silence of a city after midnight, which still hums with the memory of noise. It is not the silence of a forest, which breathes and shifts and whispers to itself. It is something older and emptier than both. A silence that feels less like the absence of sound and more like the presence of something that has no use for it. Magnus had noticed it every time he came here. The hills swallowed sound the way deep water swallows light. Completely, without echo, without return. You could speak and hear your own voice land flat against the heather, going nowhere. He and Ailsa had been walking since early afternoon, following a route they had done twice before, up through the glen, along the ridge, and back down toward the loch that sat in the hollow between two hills, like a dark eye looking upward at the sky. It was a route they loved for exactly this reason. The loch had no name on most maps, no car park, no footpath signs, just the water and the hills and the enormous stillness of the place. They reached the loch at dusk. The water was black, not the reflective black of a mirror, but the absolute black of peat, dense, opaque, holding nothing of the sky above it. The surface was perfectly still, no ripple, no wind moving across it. The surrounding hills rose on three sides, their heather the color of dried blood in the failing light, and at the far end of the loch, where the water narrowed into a shallow inlet, a single birch tree stood leafless and pale, its white bark almost luminous against the dark. Magnus stopped at the water's edge and breathed in. The air smelled of cold earth and something faintly mineral, the smell of water that had been still for a very long time. Ailsa came to stand beside him, her boot crunching on a strip of gravel at the shore, and they stood there together in the way that people stand in places that ask you to be quiet. It was Ailsa who saw her first. Magnus. Her voice was low, not a whisper, but close to one, the kind of voice you use when you are not sure whether what you are seeing is real. He followed her gaze. Near the far shore, just at the edge of the shallow inlet, where the loch spread thin over pale stones, something was floating. A person, face down in the water, arms loose at her sides. Dark hair fanned out around her head like ink spreading through glass. She was not moving. The water around her was not moving. She lay in the shallows with a perfect, terrible stillness. The kind of stillness that looks like the end of something. Magnus was moving before he had decided to move. Around the edge of the loch, boots skidding on wet rock, his breath loud in his own ears. Ailsa kept pace behind him. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the running didn't already say. The woman was lying in perhaps 30 centimeters of water. Close up, Magnus could see she was fully clothed. A dark coat, dark trousers, dark boots that had taken on water and gone heavy. Her hair was soaked black. Her hands, which rested palm down on the loch bed, were pale against the pale stones beneath them. He waded in. The cold of the water hit him like a held breath, immediate and total, climbing his shins as he moved toward her. He reached down and turned her over, carefully, the way you turn something fragile. And she came easily, offering no resistance, her body weightless in the shallows. Her eyes were open, and she was breathing. Slow, steady breaths. Shallow, but deliberate. Her eyes moved from the sky above her to Magnus's face, and they were calm. Not the panicked calm of someone in shock. Not the glassy calm of someone fading. Just calm. Still. Present. "Hello," she said. Her voice was even, clear, as though she had been expecting him. Magnus stared at her. Are you... He couldn't find the beginning of the right sentence. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. "I'm not hurt." "You were face down in the water." "Yes." "We need to get you out." He looked back at Ailsa, who was standing shin-deep beside him now, her face carefully controlled. "Help me get her up." The woman didn't resist. She let them lift her, one arm each, and they walked her out of the loch and up onto the gravel bank, where she stood between them and looked out at the black water, as though she had simply stepped away from a conversation she fully intended to return to. She was cold. That was the first thing Magnus noticed properly once they were clear of the water. Not shivering, not the violent, uncontrollable shivering of hypothermia, but cold in a deeper, quieter way. The way stone is cold. The way a room is cold when nothing living has been in it for a long time. Ailsa had already pulled her jacket off and was wrapping it around the woman's shoulders. The woman accepted this with a small nod, her eyes still on the loch. "What's your name?" Ailsa asked. "Moira." "Moira, how long have you been in the water?" A pause. The kind that means the answer is being considered carefully, not retrieved. 3 days, Moira said. The word landed like a stone. Magnus heard Ailsa make a sound. Not quite a word, something smaller and more involuntary than that. And he understood it because he felt the same thing move through him. 3 days. 3 days in a Scottish Highland loch in early October, in a coat and boots, face down. He looked at the woman. He looked at her carefully. Her face was pale, yes. And cold, yes. But her lips were not blue. Her eyes were not sunken. There was no gray in her skin, no trembling in her jaw. None of the signs that 3 days in cold water would leave on a living body. She looked like someone who had been out in the cold air for a long time. Not someone who had been submerged in it. 3 days, Magnus said slowly. Yes. You've been in the loch for 3 days. Yes. How? It wasn't quite a question. It came out flat, the way things do when you already know that no answer will be sufficient. Moira turned to look at him for the first time since they had brought her out of the water. Her eyes were dark, not dark with emotion, but dark in color, the deep amber brown of peat water, and they held his gaze with a steadiness that felt somehow ancient. I went in deliberately, she said. Something told me to. I couldn't refuse. I don't know how to explain it better than that. Something told you, Ailsa said. Not a voice, not exactly, more like, Moira looked back at the loch, more like a knowledge, the same way you know to step out of the path of something moving. You don't decide, you simply know. Silence. The hills sat around them in the dusk, enormous and indifferent. Somewhere up on the ridge, a bird called once and went quiet. "And you needed to stay in the water," Magnus said. "Yes." "Why?" "I don't know, only that it was necessary, that there was—" She paused. "Something to be completed, something the water needed, or needed to do. I'm not sure which." Magnus looked at Ailsa. Ailsa looked back at him. He could see her working through the same calculations he was working through. The same attempt to arrange these sentences into something that made sense against the rational architecture of the world. It wasn't arranging. "Your hands," Ailsa said suddenly. Moira looked down. "May I?" Moira held them out. Both of them, palms up. And Ailsa took them gently in both of hers and looked. Magnus leaned in. He knew what 3 days in water did to hands. He had read about it, had seen photographs, the way skin loosened and whitened and wrinkled into something that barely resembled itself, the way fingernails began to separate from their beds, the way soft tissue gave up its structure to the cold and the wet over time. He had prepared himself, in the moment of leaning in, for something difficult to look at. Her hands were perfect, not pale, not wrinkled, not softened by water. They looked like the hands of someone who had been walking in fresh air. Slightly pink, slightly dry, the skin smooth and unaffected, the nails clean and intact. There was a small scar on the right palm, a thin white crescent that looked years old. Nothing else. No trace of the loch at all. Ailsa set her hands down carefully. Neither she nor Magnus spoke. "I know," Moira said quietly. "I know what they should look like." They sat together for a while on the gravel bank, the three of them, with the loch dark before them, and the hills darkening above them, and the sky above the hills going slowly from gray to the deep, sourceless blue of early night. Magnus gave Moira water from his pack, and she drank it. And she sat with Ailsa's jacket around her shoulders, and her own hands resting in her lap. And she looked at the loch with an expression he could not name. It was not longing, exactly. It was something quieter than longing. The way a person looks at a place they already know they are going back to. "Do you have someone we can call?" Ailsa asked. "Someone who knows you're here?" "No," Moira said. "We should get you off the hill. It'll be fully dark in an hour, and the temperature—" "I'm not coming off the hill," Moira said, not unkindly, not defiantly, simply as a fact. "Moira," Magnus leaned forward, "you've been in the loch for 3 days. I don't understand how, I don't understand why, but you need—" "I need to go back in," she said. The words were very quiet. Quieter than the water. Quieter than the hills. "What's in there?" Ailsa said. Her voice had changed. Still even, but with something underneath it. Not fear exactly, but the awareness of being very close to something she didn't have a name for. Moira looked at the loch for a long time before answering. "I don't know what it is," she said at last. "I don't think it's a what. It's more like a condition, a state of something. The way cold is a state, or depth. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't need one. It was here. Before. The water was here, I think. And it will be here. After. And it asked you to come in. It didn't ask. It needed. There's a difference." Magnus looked at the loch. In the fading light it was seamless. No edge, no depth, no visible boundary between where the water stopped and where the dark began. It had the quality of a hole in the world. And looking at it, he felt something at the edge of his thoughts that he pushed firmly aside. A pull. Small. Insistent. The kind of thing you notice and immediately pretend you didn't. He looked away. "Don't go back in," he said. "Please," Ailsa added. Moira stood up. She handed Ailsa's jacket back to her with both hands in a small, precise movement that was almost ceremonious. She smoothed her coat. She looked at the two of them with eyes that were old in a way that had nothing to do with age. And she held their gaze for a moment, as though she were memorizing something. "Thank you," she said, "for pulling me out, for sitting with me. That was a kindness." "Moira, please don't follow me," she said. Not a command, a request. Gentle and precise, like a hand placed on a door to hold it closed. She walked toward the water. Magnus stood. He felt Ailsa's hand find his arm and grip it. Not to stop him, he understood, but because she needed something solid. He felt the pull of the loch again, stronger now, at the very edge of his thoughts. And this time, he let himself feel it. For just a moment, before he turned away from it. He heard the water accept her. A soft displacement. The quiet give of something parting, to let something through. And then nothing. He did not turn around. He stood with Ailsa's hand on his arm, and looked at the pale birch tree at the far end of the loch, and kept his eyes there while the sounds of the water settled back into silence around them. He counted his own breaths. 1, 2, 3. The hills were very still. The sky above them was the color of deep water, that sourceless, pressureless blue that belongs to the last minutes of light. After a long time, Ailsa said, "Did you feel it?" Magnus said nothing for a moment. "Yes," he said. What was it? He thought about this. He thought about the pull, that small, insistent, entirely wordless knowledge at the edge of his thoughts. The way it hadn't felt like danger. The way it had felt, strangely, like recognition. "I don't know," he said. "I don't think I want to." Ailsa nodded. They stood there a little longer, and then they turned, and they walked, and the loch settled behind them into the dark, and the hills received them back into the silence that had been there long before they came, and would remain long after they were gone. Magnus thought about Moira for years after that. Not constantly, not the way something traumatic returns, circling and demanding, but the way a particular stone in a particular path stays with you, the feel of it underfoot. Specific and strange. He thought about her hands. He thought about the thing she had said. It needed, not asked. And the way she had looked at the loch in those last moments, with an expression he had searched for a name, for over years of searching, and never found one. The closest he ever came was this. She had looked the way a person looks. When they understand something, they cannot explain to anyone who hasn't already understood it. He looked up the loch once, later that year. There was nothing unusual on record, no drowning reported, no missing person matching her description. The loch was unnamed on all the maps he checked. Some local histories mentioned it briefly, in passing. A note that the water had no visible inlet or outlet, that its depth had never been reliably measured. that the peat content of the water was unusually high, even by Highland standards. One history, older than the others, referred to the loch by a Gaelic phrase he had translated as best he could: the water that keeps what it is given. He read it once and set it down, and didn't look at it again. Sometimes on early mornings when he is somewhere quiet, somewhere where the silence has a texture and a weight to it, he notices a feeling at the edge of his thoughts. Small, barely there, like a word in a language he doesn't speak, offered without translation. He turns away from it. Every time he turns away from it, he thinks that is the right thing to do. He is fairly certain that it is. Thank you for listening to Stillwater Chronicles, where even the deepest water can hold something quietly waiting. If this stillness stayed with you, if the dark of that loch settled somewhere inside you, then let it remain a little while longer. Some places are not meant to be understood, only felt. Rest now. The water is very still.